In this next section, we'll talk about the common segment operations as well as querying information from the scene graph and performing searches for information in the scene graph. So as mentioned previously, most of the commonly expected operations are supported. We have the ability to move, copy segments around, delete, flush, rename, create. So if we looked at the methods available on segment key, we would see all these different types of operations. Okay. And in addition to the wide range of insert, geometry insert, there's a huge amount of segment control here. There are also methods to search the database. A search in Hoops Visualize is referred to as a find. That will be the name of the method. It will be a find method. And we can also navigate up and down the hierarchy. The method's nomenclature for querying information about a segment or graphical information is going to be show. So show info type. Okay. Here's a simple example of moving segments around. We have this move to method supported on our segment key class, and we're going to move segment SK2 to SK1. Okay, so just move it around, and we've literally moved that segment. It's not an include, it's not a reference. We're actually repositioning it in the hierarchy. Copy, very similar. Instead of a move to, we're copying. So the original segment is left untouched, and we're going to copy the entire segment. And if this was a piece of geometry, then we'll copy just that geometric primitive. Note that when you're copying something, you're duplicating it. Maybe that's intentional, but if you wanted to just reference and reuse an existing object, you would either do a segment include or a geometry reference, of course. Okay. Here we have an example of flush. We can flush different types. And let's see if we can go to the flush here, and we look at the types. So here's a list of types. Everything, of course, and then we get every kind of concept in the scene graph is a supported enumerated type. We can flush includes or segments, geometry, or specific pieces of geometry, of course, or specific attributes. Okay. So that's very, very flexible. Okay. And then, of course, segment key has a ability to be deleted, so does geometry key, and the reason being, if we look up the chain, why can't I click on these? Yeah, that's okay. But the base class HPS key has just a few methods, and actually let's go ahead and look it up. So of course it has delete, okay, and it has also move to. Since every key of anything that has a key, segments or geometry, include links as well, they can be deleted or moved around. So of course, as we get into geometry specific keys or segment specific keys, then they have different class specific types of methods. Okay. This was touched on a bit earlier. I mentioned that the way to query information from the scene graph, from the database, is to use routines that are called show routines. So instead of we have set routines, and then show would be analogous to a get. The reason for that, there's some history where our previous long-standing API, the 3DF API, used set and show, and for consistency, we wanted to continue with that. But just think of show as a get. That's what it is. And we mentioned this earlier as well. We can show the attributes, if there are any attributes that might have been explicitly set in that segment or locally set. And then net attributes will show whatever that segment's opinion is about those attributes, regardless of where they might have been set. Locally, inherited above, or maybe it was just the default attribute and no attribute was ever explicitly set anywhere up that tree above. That can be important to know at times if something was locally set or if it was inherited, depending on your operation. Very similar querying geometry is used, uses the geometry key class. Now, one thing about queries is when you query geometry, let me see if I can pull up an example here. Let's see. Might have an example. But when querying geometry, Hoops Visualize will give back to you a points array or a faceless array. So before that, you actually would ask for a size list, or what we call a count. So that lets you know how big of an array you need to dynamically allocate or potentially have pre-allocated on the stack so that you have an array, a buffer large enough for Hoops Visualize to write the data back into. Of course, otherwise you would write over unauthorized memory. Okay. These are all fairly self-explanatory methods. We can edit geometry. So, for example, if we have geometry that has any kind of face list, there could be edit face list variants. We talked about flush. We can not only flush contents of segments, but we could flush geometry. Showing information, as I just mentioned, we can show different aspects of geometry. And then we'll get into this a little bit more in the selection and highlighting, but we have the ability to select on geometry using the select by routines, and there's a wide range of those. And another common way of manipulating geometry, also touched on a little bit earlier, is via setting a modeling matrix to apply transforms to the local object space of that segment, or by calling kind of one of the macro higher level manipulation methods for modifying geometry, translate, scale, or rotate. I have a typo there, translate, scape, rotate.